And welcome to The Conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of The Conversation, and not just Blacks and Jews in Conversation, Blacks and Jews in Conversation, and I'm here to talk to you about a review of current events. I occupy the sole chair this evening because we're going to have, following next week, a whole series of guests. And I figured I might as well get my chance in and my time in before we do that. The Passover is coming this Saturday. Sunday night are the Seders. I want to wish everybody happy holidays. And of course, with the Passover comes a lot of food, there comes a lot of service, and a lot of love of your heritage, I hope, and a lot of review of tragedy, of slavery, something that ties Blacks and Jews together, of course, slavery, and the first concept of freedom. The very, very first concept of freedom from slavery comes from the Jewish Bible. And the 10 plagues, which are central to the Exodus, central to freedom, were necessary, a necessary precondition, a prerequisite to the achievement of freedom. Freedom did not come because people wanted another people to be free. Freedom did not come because all of a sudden mighty Pharaoh and the Egyptians said, we want to be rid of slaves and we want to do the work ourselves. Freedom came because God intervened with wonderful leaders such as Moses and Aaron and Joshua, and by dint of force and faith, Egypt was overthrown. Now there have been a plethora of programs on the History Channel and A&E and every other type of network artifice that explore Ramses II and every other alleged pharaoh of the Bible, showing what a mighty potentate he was and how there is no record of the Exodus. Even Penn and Teller, people of goodwill, try and explain how there's no evidence of the Exodus. Well, they can keep going and digging into the sand. They'll come up with just sand. We have our Bible and our account that the whole world has copied and the whole world has emulated. Even the ancient Egyptians are no more. They can keep digging in Egypt for whatever relics they want to come up with, and God bless them, I love the museums of all the antiquities. But the Jews still survive because we are not based on race. We are based on faith. The Egyptians were annihilated by one cause or another. As God said, I will make a reed out of Egypt for what they did to the Jews. We, Israel, we survive, strong and mighty and unconquerable, coming back from out of time. And the whole world can't help but gulp and gasp and still want everything we have. And we even have Jerusalem, which we prayed for in this very Haggadah. Next year in Jerusalem, we'll make that everybody's desire. Come and visit. But that's all that can be done. Visit, because it is part of Israel. It is the eternal capital, and it shall remain the eternal capital. I see one program after another, whereas Ramses was not at any time defeated. Well, I have yet to see any people such as the Hebrews write of defeat. They write of defeat. They write of all the vices and all the sorrowful moments of their own forefathers and mothers. But that is why the Bible has survived intact, because it is so human, because it is so understandable, because we can relate to it. And of course you really cannot relate to it unless you study the Talmud. And of course the insults directed at the Talmud over the centuries are by those who simply cannot apply themselves to that study. I, of course, dabbled in studying the Talmud because one has to spend more than a lifetime to do it justice. But I have studied enough to be able to hold my own in most discourses. Apart from Passover, which will take up 8 days come Saturday, we had the great pleasure, the 14th, to see in the mighty New York Times a review on NewYorkTimes.com, on the website, whatever it is, of the New York Times, a review of our great friend who has been on these airwaves many times, and of the neighboring show, with Let Them Talk, Irwin Corey. Irwin Corey has given us many a great moment. Irwin Corey has 93 years at the time of the article, 94 now. I've accompanied him to the Friars Club many times. I've had the pleasure of supping with him and seeing him take out his dentures, as it says in the Times. But what are you going to do at 93? I've never had a cavity, thank God, but even I don't anticipate being in that shape by 93. I don't anticipate being 93, God bless him. And as I said, we don't take call-ins on this show. The phones keep ringing all the time. I just want to advise there are no call-ins. It's guests or just me. And Irwin finally gets his justice. He gets reviewed in the New York Times. And if you have a chance, come see him before he turns 95, because he gets more ornery as the years go by. And Irwin's son Richard just celebrated his birthday. They've been partners with Blacks and Jews in Conversation for many years. And if you wait till 93, you'll get your article in the New York Times. We've been featured in the New York Times with our essay contest in Brooklyn against hate, and with photographs of our debates in Queens with Pete Seeger. And we've had other photographs. And I hope our time will come again, because that paper's done us justice. I had the pleasure of being invited by the America-Israel Friendship League, our sponsor for our sojourns in Israel these last couple of years, which is also featured in the Second Call, the current issue by the New York City Criminal Court newspaper, a current review of our last visits. I had the pleasure of going today to City Hall under Council Speaker Quinn's auspices, with various other, Michael Miller and the Deputy Speaker and the Deputy Consul General present, and Bill Baer, who's been on this mic, to hear from visiting collegiates and high school students and teachers from a city known as Sderot in Israel. Now, if you're not familiar with the name of Sderot, it goes hand in glove with Passover. And I'll also read you an account I got by way of email from Florida. And the two, you'll understand, are perfect bookends for an introduction to Passover. Sderot was not so much in the news while the Jews lived in their own homes and cities they settled in Gaza, northern Gaza. And they had, as we've discussed many times on these airwaves, beautiful greenhouses supplying organic crops, and being environmentally quite conscious. We promoted this, supplying the only organic food for the Middle East, into Asia, as well, of course, Israel. Besides the tomatoes, you had I don't know how many other foodstuffs. But when those greenhouses were turned over to the Muslims, when regrettably the Jews were extracted by their fellow Jews from Israel, and I do mean extracted, those greenhouses were bought by America, various Jews in America, to be turned over as a goodwill gesture to the Muslims for food. And instead they were destroyed, together with the temples that were vacant, the synagogues. And in their place were put Qassam rockets, and an unending barrage of Qassam rockets, more and more every week, have been raining down on the next town they can now reach, that now that those cities were destroyed and vacated by the Jews that protected them previously. So instead of having a more peaceful approach, you now have obviously a more aggressive warlike approach. We've discussed all this before. I've invited all types of you onto these airwaves, and we've had all types of views onto these airwaves, and I continue to do so. The facts remain. As we said, contrary to the position of General Sharon, and may he recover, you are not spending less money, you are spending more money since the removal of the Jews. you are enduring more aggression from the Gaza Muslims, not less. You are facing the destruction of your inner cities, such as Ashkelon and Sderot, and not a peaceful rapprochement. And those are only the few points. You have many more. You have the inculcation of and smuggling of many more arms into Gaza than before. You no longer have a buffer zone by the many brave city dwellers in Gaza who withstood everything that could be thrown at them, and they withstood it with courage and without complaint. And now you have the town of Sderot, students, children, women, what have you, all facing a daily, nightly, unending, ceaseless threat to their lives, which Israel sometimes does, sometimes doesn't try and stop. And when Israel does move in its mighty armor, you have Condoleezza or someone else coming in, and thank God it's President Bush, because if it was President Carter, who this day is meeting with Hamas, you would most likely have, who knows, Carter might even join Hamas and telling Israel, we want you to withdraw. I'd like to see Hamas send a rocket into New York, God forbid, and see what America's reaction was. Well, we saw America's reaction on that terrible day in 9/11 with Afghanistan and Iraq. And here we have a city outside of Gaza, as if that should make a difference, outside of Gaza, in Israel, pre-Gaza, in more than one city, facing these daily rockets, and the administration is telling Israel, cool it. And we heard from these students, the ceilings are falling in, the schools are falling in, 25 kids have to stop math. Not such a terrible thing to stop math, but for them, they like math. They stop math and they run out the door, the alarm rings, they have I don't know how many seconds before a rocket lands on them. You'll hear tapes of a 7-man dove hiking because you just don't hear from me. The whole point is to get evidence, get witnesses, get people who have been there. He's been there, and he will tell you how he met with people on one trip, on the next trip they were gone, they were dead. And he met with one person, and the next trip they had no legs. And on one trip, he heard about one elder sister who heard the noise. It was like in World War II, as we heard from Hilda Hessel on our program at Stuyvesant on gender fairness. During the Blitz in London, the V2, towards the end of the war yet, you'd hear the buzz bomb. And as soon as the buzz stopped, you knew you were in trouble, the bomb would drop. And here you'd hear the noise, and you have seconds, the bomb dropped. The elder sister went to cover her younger sister. The younger sister survived. The elder sister died. But this is happening in a city supposedly not at war, except Hamas doesn't know that. And America, Israel brought these students over, of all ages, male and female, to tell you that their daily lives are completely disrupted. Now, it reminds me of when we heard from survivors and authors about the Holocaust, where they wanted their lives in the concentration camps to continue as if normal, where they wanted to continue with their studies, even though the next day they could be gone, where they wanted to have the lectures and the classes be taught, even though the bombs were overhead or the Nazis could come in at any moment. Why should this be in Israel? And why should this be before Passover? And why should they not exercise the might of the Jewish state, which they have? Now, if Israel did not have that strength, if Israel was not able to grant its freedom, I could understand they might have to run for their lives. But Israel is the strongest nation by far in Africa, in the Middle East, and in a good part of Asia. Why should each one of these witnesses have to say how scared they are? I remember when my father fought in 1948 with nothing, right out of the Holocaust. They did not say how scared they were. They said what a glorious moment it was to fight for freedom. And now Israel is saying how scared they are. Israel takes out one terrorist after another. We just read from Iran how Iran is alleging that Saudi Arabia even helped Israel do it in Damascus, take out one of these mastermind terrorists. Nobody has had the record that Israel has in taking out terrorists, and taking out masterminds, and taking out the power brokers of terror over the years. Why should Israel's sons and daughters be quaking in fear in peaceful cities because you have terrorists no better than pirates across the border, simply literally lighting a match to rockets and sending them off, and then appealing to the United Nations for immunity, or to our Secretary of State? It is just as if Pharaoh has hardened his heart and is refusing to let the missile stop. There's no difference. On this Passover, the plagues should stop hitting the Jews. The students go to something called Shah HaNegev High School, from educational vision to practice, facing the future. That's the name of the brochure I was given, Facing the Future. What is their future? 3,000 have already left, so they wrote. 3,000 have left because Israel removed the Jews from Gaza. That's how you have to face it. It wasn't as if everybody said, yeah, go get the Jews out of there. No, there were those like us that said, don't do it. 50% of Israel said, don't do it. I don't even believe Bush said, go ahead and do it. This president, to his credit, was a very good friend of Israel, and his administration was a very good friend of Israel. And Israel is a very good friend of Israel. So I don't know where these ideas came from, literally. But the people have to live with their consequences. Nasrallah, of infamy, of Hezbollah, he said if he had known that Israel would react the way it did in Lebanon, he wouldn't have done what he did. I don't know what he would have done different, because he does all these nasty things all the time, but he certainly would not have done, he said, most of what he did. So let's study that, and let's figure it out and apply it to Hamas. Because Hamas and Hezbollah are one and the same. They come from Iran. It's a proxy state of Iran. And all you have to do to understand Iran is to study Hamas and Hezbollah, and you understand Iran. And anybody who thinks that Iran is not a terrorist enclave, just look at what they're doing with Hamas and Hezbollah. And let's apply some ingenuity here. Now, I want to read you the other account I got, because I'm not here to cheer you up on Passover, not tonight, not when I'm here alone. I'm not here to cheer you up. I got to work too hard. I got this from a Daphne Ziman, Z-I-M-A-N, through Stand With Us. Now, I usually am involved with stand-up comedy, but this is Stand With Us. I appreciate the song Stand By Me. This is Stand With Us. It came by way of Florida. I've been inquiring as to the particulars. I do not know the university or college where it occurred. We've traveled across universities throughout the country. And briefly, she says, I have to tell you, I quote, of an experience I had last night that was so anti-Semitic and frightening. I remember when Jesse Jackson, in apologizing for the Hymietown incident, said, quite frankly, words hurt. Now, this is about the same thing. Last night, she writes, Daphne Ziman, and it's been circulated by a whole number of people, none of whom I'm familiar with, I was honored by Kappa Alpha Psi, a fraternity at her university, for children uniting nations with African-American children who are living out of home care. A very worthy charity. I dedicated my life to saving these children from abuse, neglect, and a life of crime. As part of this organization, we have a national reach, and we hear from all these organizations throughout the country continuously. Speaking, Daphne Ziman says, we created Adoption Day. And we've left seeds across the country, not this one, but I get word all the time of different things that have been created by the programs and by the panels we've brought across the country. This person created Adoption Day and Day of the Child. Wonderful things. Determined to recruit caring adults to be mentors and lifesavers for our at-risk children in the inner cities. Certainly were the goals. The mayor of whatever place this is was present, city council member Bernard Parks, Assemblyman Mike Davis, a Senator Mark Ridley Thomas. Obviously, you get the picture. She was introduced as a child advocate and a leader in the Jewish community. She gave her remarks and was very moved by Hillary Clinton's speech and the spirit of Dr. King from Memphis, and she expressed to the crowd how grateful she was to listen to Senator McCain, in this case, apologize for not having recognized the value of the birthday of Dr. King at the time, but Senator McCain was the only one of the candidates who went to Dr. King's side of the tragedy where he was murdered. At the time, the other candidates were elsewhere. And she then writes and says, I acknowledge Senator Obama's speech from the campaign trail about Dr. King's mentorship. She thanked all the people present, including a Reverend Eric Lee, President and CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, my contact with the Southern Leadership Christian Conference over the years has been mixed. It hasn't been positive. It's been mixed. But it hasn't been like this. Reverend Eric Lee, who was introduced as a keynote speaker of wherever this took place, he began his speech thanking Jesus for Obama, who was going to be, I quote, the leader of the world. These are her remarks, not mine. And Reverend Lee continued by referring to other leaders like Dr. King, being that this was the moment of celebrating Dr. King's spirit on the anniversary of his death, and Malcolm X. I happen to have admired Malcolm X myself. After Malcolm X came back from Saudi Arabia, it's a very interesting history. He was trying a rapprochement with all kinds of people. He was a brilliant individual before he was murdered. It was right after the mention of Malcolm X, says Daphne Ziman, and who I've never met yet, that he looked, Reverend Lee, directly at me and started talking about the African-American children who are suffering because of the Jews that have featured them, the African-American children, as rapists and murderers, unquote. Quote, he spoke of a Jewish rabbi, corrected himself to say, what other kind of rabbis are there but Jews, close quote, and he told how this rabbi came to him to say that he would like to bring the communities of the African-Americans and Jews together, and Reverend Lee said, quotes, no, 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 close quotes, and he shouted into the crowd, we are not going to come together. The Jews have made money on us in the music business, and we are the entertainers, and they are economically enslaving us, close quotes. Reverend Lee allegedly continued as to how now the salvation has come, and the gates have opened for the African Americans to come together behind Barack Obama, and now is the time to show them, the Jews, and so on and so on and so on. And then there is worse. But you get the picture. Now, certainly this doesn't stand for Barack Obama. And every candidate comes out and they attract all kinds of people who think it's their moment to say the nastiest things. And I have no evidence as yet that this actually occurred or that the Reverend Eric Lee did say this, but it is symptomatic of what I have incurred in the past. And I welcome this Eric Lee and anybody else onto the show, and certainly the author, to explain what took place. But given the description, which is rather detailed, it certainly details somebody in great pain over a great misunderstandings or great assaults. And neither should take place, and that's why we exist. That's why our organization exists. Oh, and I offer ourselves to come to this locale to make it good, or to try to make it good, to heal. We can send members of our organization to repair damage, and that no one should be disheartened. No one should feel that the good work that they have done with children, and the good work they have done with inner city, and in bringing Jews and blacks and others together, or of other candidates for office, should be undone by mean-spirited people who have nothing to do with this good work. And at the same time, Ms. Ziman goes on to say that her protest was reflected in that teary-eyed and bursting with horror, she fled the room, and her friends tried to bring her back. And this would not be my reaction. My reaction would have been to stand up and to ask the mayor and the assemblymen and everybody else present, including our friends and supporters, what is going on? Why are these remarks being said with impunity? Why is there no response? As in Passover, you must stand up to Pharaoh. You must stand up to the tyrants. You must stand up to the hostility and the Jew hatred if that is what is being encountered. You must seek an explanation. You must stop the remarks in their track. You cannot let it pass. And I assure you, there are people waiting for people to do just that. You will have allies. Sderot has allies. These kids have allies. And Daphne Ziman has allies. And they were just waiting for someone to say the first words. Our organization will say those words if you can't. Simply pay the expenses and we will come with the right people, with the right message. Passover is a time of family getting together. And we have enough enemies out there without attacking ourselves. It is a time when Sderot should feel comfortable with itself. When Sderot should be able to sit down to a Passover table without Qassam rockets hitting it. And if necessary, the Israeli army on Passover should be able to make sure that that safety is ensured. And it should be able to go out there and make it rocket-free. And if people want to go on campuses to help children, they should be able to sit and get their rewards and acknowledgments without being faced with Jew hatred of any form. And leading speakers should be cleared beforehand with what kind of remarks they're going to say. And I would be happy to learn that this was a fiction. I'd be very surprised.